The U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
Ottawa says it has a plan to fight back against new U.S. duties on Canadian lumber.
This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it, and you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers.
Ontario has just slammed the brakes on America's lumber lifeline in a move that feels less like trade policy and more like economic warfare. For decades, the United States has depended on Canadian lumber to keep its construction sector alive. Now, after Washington piled on crushing tariffs, Ontario's response has been swift and merciless. Cut off the flow. What once seemed like a steady and reliable pipeline of raw materials is suddenly gone, and the fallout is nothing short of brutal. From rising housing costs to panicked builders, the shockwaves are already rattling the American economy.
U.S. needs to import wood. It cannot produce enough wood on its own. It has to import because it can't produce it.
Let's put this into perspective. Canada ships nearly 28 million cubic meters of lumber across the border every single year. That's not just a number on a spreadsheet. That's almost 1/3 of the entire American demand for lumber. Take that away, and suddenly every construction project, from suburban homes to major city towers, gets hit with massive cost overruns. Housing prices alone are now climbing by $10,000 to $30,000 per build, and the squeeze isn't coming from Ontario. It's hitting Americans right in their wallets. This isn't just a supply cut. It's a reminder of just how dependent the US is on its northern neighbor.
Canada does not dump lumber into the United States.
What Ontario did wasn't just an economic measure. It was a power move. By cutting off lumber, they basically pulled the plug on America's most vital construction material, and the chaos unfolding is almost surreal. Why did this happen? Because Washington decided to jack up tariffs to an eye-watering 35% on Canadian goods. That's not a gentle nudge. It's a full-on baseball bat to the face of cross-border trade. Ontario's response couldn't have been clearer. If that's how you want to play, then no lumber for you. Picture it like this. A neighbor who always comes over to borrow sugar suddenly finds your pantry door locked and the key thrown away. Except in this case, the sugar is the backbone of the US housing market.
Americans are going to be finding out very shortly the impact that these duties are going to be having on them.
To really understand the gravity of Ontario's decision, you need to look at the scale. Ontario isn't tossing a couple of extra boards across the border. It's shipping roughly 28 million cubic meters of lumber each year. That's nearly 1/3 of the wood that frames American homes, schools, and office buildings. To visualize it, imagine the amount of timber it would take to build 16 Empire State Buildings. Not once a year, not once every few months, but every single month. That's the scale of the supply line Ontario just cut off. And now, with that tap closed, the US construction industry is left scrambling, facing delays, soaring prices, and the very real prospect of projects grinding to a halt.
The forest industry is a pillar of the Canadian economy. Today, I'm announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry pivot to a growing Canadian market and to the markets of reliable trading partners around the world.
And the financial markets? They saw it coming and reacted instantly. Lumber futures had already been on shaky ground, but in March 2025 they spiked to $650 per 1,000 board feet, and that was before Ontario's shutdown fully took hold. Now, analysts warn prices could soar as high as $765 if the standoff continues. For the construction industry, that's not a minor inconvenience, it's a full-blown disaster. Builders can't budget around skyrocketing lumber prices. They can't replace lumber with steel or optimism. What Ontario's move signals is the beginning of what could become the sharpest housing supply crunch the United States has experienced in decades, and the early warning bells are already ringing.
The US could increase the amount that it imports from countries like Germany or Sweden in terms of just softwood, but they do not have enough to completely replace how much we get from Canada.
Here's the truth. None of this should come as a shock. The US has leaned heavily on Canadian lumber for decades, the same way a college student leans on instant noodles to survive. Even with every American mill running at full throttle, domestic production can only cover about 70% of demand. That leaves a 25 to 30% gap, and Canada, especially Ontario, has always been the one to fill it. Remove Ontario from the equation, and suddenly that gap isn't just inconvenient, it's catastrophic. Shelves empty, construction projects stall, deadlines stretch, and frustrated contractors are left shouting into the void. The US has been warned about this dependency for years, and now it's watching the consequences play out in real time.
Covered late morning. Lumber futures are, of course, higher given the news on the 25% tariff on Canada. There is already a 14.5.
If you want the raw numbers spelled out, here's the reality check. In 2023 alone, the US imported an astonishing 28.1 million cubic meters of softwood lumber from Canada. That wasn't some small trade line on a spreadsheet. That was worth nearly $58 billion annually. Yes, billion. That's the true scale of this relationship. And yet, despite being so dependent, Washington thought it was a smart idea to slap heavy tariffs on Canadian goods, as if Canada would just stay quiet and keep shipping. Spoiler, they didn't. Even when American mills are pushed to maximum capacity, they can only turn out about 30 to 35 million cubic meters of lumber per year. On paper that sounds decent, until you realize demand overshoots that by millions of cubic meters. And here's the painful truth. Lumber isn't fast food. You can't wave a wand and grow forests overnight. It takes years of planting, cultivating, and harvesting before wood ever touches a sawmill. That's why this supply gap is so dangerous, and why Ontario's move hit so hard so fast.
A little bit more lumber within their supply, but there's no way that they can replace the imports coming from Canada.
And here's the kicker. The idea of the US just finding another supplier is almost laughable. When Washington looks abroad, the options are thin and scattered. Germany might pitch in with 2 million cubic meters, Sweden with maybe 1 million, Chile a bit more. Put them all together, and you're still nowhere near the 28 million Canada provides every single year. And that's before you factor in shipping halfway across the globe, which adds weeks of waiting and piles of extra cost. So much for simply replacing Canada. But the real comedy is watching US officials insist, once again, that they're self-sufficient. We've heard this line for decades. America can handle its own lumber needs. Really? Because the math says otherwise. Without Canada, that myth collapses faster than a poorly built deck in a windstorm. Ontario's move ripped the curtain away and exposed the uncomfortable truth. American independence in lumber is more fiction than fact.
Cuts off the lumber, puts a tariff. Do you know whose costs are going up? It's the American people that want to buy a home. They're going to pay more for their home.
But who ends up paying the steepest price? Regular people, home buyers. Let's talk about housing, because that's where this crisis stings the most. According to the National Association of Home Builders, lumber makes up roughly 35% of the cost of building a new home. So when lumber prices spike, the entire price tag of a house balloons with it. Projections show the cost of a single-family home could rise by $10,000 to $14,000 by 2027. And that's on top of already brutal mortgage rates and inflation. In the short term, new builds are already costing buyers an extra $5,000 to $8,000. But if this standoff escalates into a worst-case scenario, we could be looking at construction costs exploding by $20,000 to $30,000 per house by 2025. Imagine saving for years, finally being ready to build your dream home, and suddenly being told you need another $30,000 just because tariff politics went sideways. For first-time buyers, that's not just a setback, it's a soul-crushing gut punch.
Number one customer to the U.S. and 28 states rely on us to for the products that they ship up.
And the warnings aren't coming from bloggers or think tanks. They're coming from the National Association of Home Builders themselves, who have already waved the red flag. They predict construction costs will rise 10 to 15% across the board. That's not abstract. That's real money, hitting real people in real places. Look at California, already drowning in unaffordable housing. This tariff war is a sledgehammer to a market that was broken before it even started. Or take Texas, where booming construction is practically a way of life. A price spike like this is like kneecapping the state's entire growth strategy. And Ontario? They're not just rolling over. They've hinted at setting export quotas, deciding for themselves exactly how much lumber the US gets. That's not a tweak. That's leverage in its purest form. And when you look back, the climb in tariffs tells the whole story. 14.54% in 2024, creeping to 20.56% by early 2025, and now an absurd 35%. That's not a tax. That's a blockade. So Ontario flipping the script with quotas isn't just defiance. It's survival with a smirk.
President Trump's tariffs are taking direct aim at our country, our province, and our people. Communities across Ontario are feeling the impact, and I know workers and their families are worried.
And here's where Ontario really shows its hand. They're not stuck in the past, just shipping raw logs across the border like it's 1950. They've been moving up the value chain, hard. We're talking engineered wood, prefabricated modules, high-end cabinetry, finished furniture. These aren't just products that sell for more. They also dodge many of the tariffs that hammer raw lumber. And the strategy is working. Back in 2020, even as raw lumber exports dipped, shipments of processed wood products jumped 12%. That wasn't luck. That was strategy paying dividends. By focusing on value-added goods, Ontario earns more profit per shipment and deals with less trade drama. It's like upgrading from selling plain sugar to selling gourmet chocolate. The base ingredient might be the same, but the margins are worlds apart.
Put duties on Canadians, our share went from 30% down to now we're running at about 23, 24%. But that gap has been made up by Europeans. So the US is still importing 30%, but now, 7% is coming from Europe and 23 from us.
And the genius of Ontario's pivot is simple: diversification. By spreading exports across Asia Pacific and Europe, and by climbing the ladder from raw wood to finished goods, Ontario has made itself far less vulnerable to Washington's tariff games. When the US raises duties, Ontario can simply shrug and pivot to other markets. Meanwhile, the ripple effects south of the border are looking rougher by the day. Take cross-border retail. It's already collapsing. Traffic at Rainbow Bridge is down 33%. Peace Bridge down 12%. That's not just a weekend dip. That's a third of the shoppers vanishing overnight. Erie County, New York, has already felt the pain. They lost $4.9 million in tax revenue in just 1 month. That's not pocket change. That's potholes left unfilled and city budgets gutted. And this isn't just about wood anymore. Steel, aluminum, copper, all of them are now under 50% tariffs. Imagine running a construction project where every single input suddenly costs half again as much. That's not a pinch. It's industrial strangulation.